Welcome to this episode of our program Daily Debate. As usual, we will be discussing an important debate, and today we'll be focusing on the US-Africa summit that is taking place in Washington, that is attended by many of the African leaders. Of course, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was invited to this summit as Egypt's crucial and pivotal role in Africa is much appreciated. This summit is focusing on helping African countries face the repercussions of the global economic crisis, particularly in terms of food resilience, energy prices, ways to adapt to climate change. Also, it is to deal with the developments and the security issues, ways to confront the repercussions of the Russian-Ukraine war, the aftermath of the coronavirus pandemic, and it do add momentum to the US-Africa relations. This is exactly what we are going to speak about tonight, as we are here holding our episode. Leaders are attending a number of sessions, and President Sisi will be laying down Egypt's vision regarding the US-Africa relations. On the sidelines of this summit, the President held a number of meetings since yesterday and today. Number of meetings, the latest of which were the top story of the day. And our first top story is that President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met with the leaders of the American Jewish organization on Thursday, during which they probed bilateral ties and issues of mutual concern. President Sisi confirmed that a settlement for the Palestinian cause would represent a huge step in the history of the Middle East and completely change the region's critical reality. The President wished a new stage of peace, cooperation, development and peace coexistence. Presidential spokesman Ambassador Bassam Radi said that the meeting asserted the significance of the strategic ties between Egypt and the US, as well as boosting cooperation and coordination regarding various international files. On the part, the leaders of the American Jewish Organization expressed appreciation for Egypt's efforts in boosting peace principles in the region under the leadership of President Sisi. Later, President Sisi met with head of the Libyan Presidential Council, Mohammed al-Menfi, during which they reviewed ties and latest developments in Libya. And still with our top stories, and the US-Africa summit hosted by US President Joe Biden continued its activities in Washington on Thursday. The sessions are entitled "In Africa of Good Governance, Democracy, Respect for Human Rights, Justice and a Rule of Law." Biden told the summit that he planned to visit the sub-Saharan Africa in what will be the first trip by a US president since 2015. The US President noted that he would also be dispatching many of his top advisors to Africa, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. Biden said that the African leaders had spoken about the importance of holding free, fair and transparent elections, Right, welcome back, and let me again welcome our distinguished guest, Ambassador Jilan Allam, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you again for being with us. And,
pleasure.
The US-Africa Summit, and yes, this is the second edition since 2014, and it is held at the backdrop of many circumstances. Today, the most important files that the leaders are addressing: Africa of good governance, democracy, respect of human rights, justice and the rule of law, plus a number of other issues. If I may take your reading to the summit and the circumstances that comes at the backdrop.
Well, the way I see it, that our president, President El-Sisi, is visiting Washington, D.C., wearing two hats. First of all, of course, the hat, the Egyptian hat. The second hat is the hat of the president of COP27, which just successfully ended a few days ago.
Indeed.
So, because as president of the COP27, he will be the president of climate responsibilities throughout this year, till November 23, 2023, when the hat is passed on to the Emirates.
Indeed.
So this is very important. We have to take the two sides together. And of course, the bilateral relations are always there. I mean, we are talking always GERD, we are always talking Palestinian issue, but this time we are also adding to it Africa, United States. And Egypt is playing that very particular role with a lot of ability, because it has been in relation with the United States. Let's remember that our relations are U.S.-Egyptian relations are celebrating their centenary this year. 1922 was the year where first diplomatic exchange between Egypt and the United States happened. So 2022, this is the centenary of the relations between Egypt and the United States. So that takes it to another dimension, to another level of talk. What can the United States do for Africa? Okay. Invitation was extended to 50 countries from Africa, presidents, head of governments, and so on. So this is a summit that is the highest level of diplomacy. This is as high, as far as you can go when it comes to decision making, because you are talking at the high level of government. Therefore, this is a very important, and it is a 3 days. It's not like a day or two, it's a 3 days summit. So it is also very substantial, and we are discussing very strong issues. For the United States, always, and in every instance, always human rights, democracy, rule of law is the basic tenet for any relations. But when you're talking the same tenets about 50 countries, then you have different levels of adherence to these tenets, and you cannot kind of just throw a card, you know, throughout the table and say, well, this is it. So it's a very delicate discussion. And our presence there also is of a very delicate, because there is a decision that has been taken during COP27, which is the establishment of a fund to fund the climate assistance and supporting the African countries, particularly the African countries, to be able to sustain and to manage and to adapt, to take adaptation measures vis-à-vis the climate. How far is the United States going to abide by these decisions? We'll have to see that. How far will the United States, vis-à-vis Africa, come forward and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But not this is what I am going to do, this is what I'm doing. I think this is very serious. This is we have, in terms of international relations, the stage, we have reached a very, very serious stage in the making up of a new world order, which is basically delimited now by economic power. You have a new power struggle on the scene, coming up, popping up. It's not the United States. Well, I like...
It's exploding.
I hope it is not. I think it will go beyond that. I think that this kind of beginning of a new world order and the entrenchment of the different powers is going to go beyond. And particularly that we have been into a very delicate situation when it comes to the international arena during these last 3 years. So you had COVID-19, then you have recession, automatic recession throughout the world. Then a climate change that we have seen kind of flowing in a very aggressive fashion, particularly in the northern part of
Europe.
of Europe, the United States, Canada, and so on. So much has been on the table for countries to discuss. And of course, the war, the Ukrainian-Russia war, and the fallout from that, which is basically touching two very strong areas. It's not only the war per se that we have to be worried about, it's the fallout of the war. So it's food, grains, and energy. And without these two, you have humanity in very serious danger and no backup for it, because doors are closing. So we have to take things very seriously and not talk about it at the usual rhythm or rate of addressing the world arena. The United Nations, I am a person who has worked, as a diplomat. I mean, basically, I am a UN person. So 40 years of diplomacy, of multilateral diplomacy. But I can tell you that now, the way I look at it, it has to be handled in a very, very different fashion. And I think that countries, and particularly countries mostly affected. We used to speak about least developed countries, emerging economies. No, we have a larger series now, or affected economies and affected countries, who are in serious danger and serious problems, reaching as far as famine. Look at Africa. Africa population is around 1.424 million. I mean 1,424,000,000 out of 8 billion. That's 18% of the world population. And we are talking about, from these 54 countries, we have 26 countries in the list of the least developed countries in the world.
Yes.
So can you imagine how far things are going, and at a very high speed? We have to take it seriously. And now the climate is not helping us. It's not helping anybody. So we have another incumbent problem. We are facing it now with a lot of reticence. Well, should we step forward? Should we keep looking? No. I mean, what we are seeing...
Who should we? And I mean here, because we're speaking about Africa, we're speaking about the most vulnerable continent,
Yes.
The most affected by all the challenges and developments and threats and crises worldwide.
Yeah.
And yet we are not the initiator, but the ones who are really paying the price. So how do you view, I mean here are some of the US President's promises, for an instance.
Yes.
Today we want broader participation of African leaders in strengthening bilateral actions, relations rather with the United States. Economic transformation will not happen in Africa without cheap energy and good governance. And we are committed to making that happen.
Yes.
We will sign a memorandum of understanding with Africa Free Trade Secretariat to facilitate commercial dealings. I mean, all these, also $300 million, or rather $1,300 million will be for the African Trade Organization. We will provide $500 million to establish a road, networks, and all the infrastructure. All these are promises.
Yeah.
We have also seen at the beginning of this month an important summit taking place also in Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
With great promises as well.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the co-relevance between both summits and promises as well.
What is it, this English, proverb that said, the road to hell is paved with what? With good intentions. With good intentions. We have had a lot of good intentions. Listen, my first post was in New York. permanent mission of the United Nations, and we had this 1975, special session of the General Assembly after the 1973 war, when the OPEC countries decided, that particularly the Arab OPEC countries, okay, Europe, United States, no more energy sources. It's either withdrawal from occupied territories, 1973 war, or and peace for Palestine state and so on, or nothing. How far is that? That's 47 years. And where are we? Not much. A lot of meetings, a lot of international, a lot of summits, and here we are. We are a summit that talks famine, a summit that says corona, COVID, so on and so forth, and we are still talking today, the second day of a summit, we are talking rule of law, democracy, and I respect democracy, I respect rule of law, I respect all of this beautiful, but this does not feed the people. This does not this does not bring medicine to sick people in Africa. This does not prevent famine. This does not. I do not see aid coming up. I see the money still in the banks in the United States and Europe. I don't see it floating anywhere. We have been, how long have you been discussing, Egypt has been discussing this late payment by the IMF. How long have we been? We've been on and off, on and off. Just bring your pound down. Bring it down. More down, please. More down, please. More down, please. And I don't know where I'm going to put it down anymore. People are screaming.
Let me here take it from the African at large perspective,
but this is the same. This is the same approach. This is the same approach where we are. I think the United States, Europe, the developed countries, industrialized countries, who are harming the climate, who are harming our planet, who are taking the best out of it, who are making the best out of it, should be realizing that if we do not help each other, if they do not help the African countries who are succumbing to this kind of disaster, I think that everybody will suffer. And those who have been used, look, with Russia, with Russia, having been penalized, for me this is very strange, and it is a case that has to be studied, that a permanent member of the Security Council is being penalized by its colleagues, but is being penalized. And Europe itself does not have enough energy. How suffering are they? How are they going to face this winter? It's going to be harsh and it's going to be difficult. Are they willing to sit and negotiate? Yes, they will sit and negotiate, because this is the only way of discussing and giving rights to whoever. So where is Africa in all this?
Africa is a main file of itself. Africa has it all. Ambassador, before we continue on, Ambassador Jilan, with our discussion, let's have the second report. And President Sisi meets members of the Congressional Friends of Egypt. Let's watch.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met with members of the Congressional Friends of Egypt caucus from both the Republican and Democratic parties at his residence in Washington, D.C. Presidential spokesman Ambassador Bassam Radi said President el-Sisi underscored the decades-long strategic relation between Egypt and the U.S. The president reiterated Egypt's commitment to further strengthening all aspects of these relations within a framework of mutual respect and joint interests, particularly in light of the turbulent regional situation in the Middle East and the escalating challenges it poses. Those include primarily instability and the growing threat of terrorism, which have affected several countries, in addition to the negative repercussions on the economy and the energy and food security, which resulted from numerous and successive global crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian-Ukrainian crisis. The members of the Congressional Friends of Egypt caucus valued the profound cooperation between Egypt and the U.S., stressing the huge importance the U.S. places on its relationship with Egypt. They confirmed that Egypt is considered a cornerstone for security and stability in the Middle East and the Arab world, and is a pivotal partner of the U.S. in the region. The members of the Congressional Friends of Egypt caucus expressed immense appreciation for Egypt's successful and vigorous role under the leadership of President el-Sisi in combating terrorism and extremist ideology, rectifying the religious discourse, and establishing the noble concepts and values of freedom of belief, tolerance, and acceptance of the other. The U.S. congressman emphasized to President el-Sisi that the U.S. will not forget Egypt's credit in opening the door of peace and spreading the culture of coexistence in the Middle East region. The meeting discussed ways to foster closer bilateral relations in a multitude of fields and recent developments on the regional and international arenas, particularly the latest in the Palestinian issue. The U.S. congressman lauded Egypt's efforts in support of the peace process. President el-Sisi reiterated Egypt's unwavering position in this regard, namely to reach a just and comprehensive solution that ensure the rights of the Palestinian people in accordance with international reference, which opens up broader prospects for peaceful coexistence and cooperation among all peoples of the region.
Right, welcome back, and back to you, Ambassador Jilan. And we were speaking about, you said respectively here, what can be said in 2 words: the right to live. We're just asking for the right to live, and this, I guess, is the main principle, big values of human rights, right? Right, President Sisi is there and will be giving his speech in few, maybe in an hour or 2.
Yes.
And it would be reflecting the vision of Egypt to deal with the African issues. This file has been put as a prior file for Egypt. Egypt has been working on this file for years and years. We're not speaking just the time when Egypt was the president or the chairman of the African Union, but it has been putting this
constantly
file for 8 years.
Yes.
Almost.
Yes.
How do you view Egypt's constant policy and diplomacy towards Africa and the constant vision?
I think that Egypt is taking Africa's causes, it's not one cause,
yes,
causes at heart, very much, from a very long time. Let us say from the early 50s, since we have had the 23rd of July revolution. Of course, it has gone through different phases, and because the dangers that faced it had many different aspects and different ways of showing itself. And it needed all the time changes to its diplomacy, changes even to the strategy of how to help it. Now, I don't want to spend time on the history of that, but I want to see now, how does the international arena, we are playing a strategic game now. How is the arena presenting itself? We have the usual main powers, the United States, Europe, per se, Russia, the usual players, but we have a very strong and coming in full strength, adding itself to that. It used to be because of the number of its population, because it was part of the winning parties, victorious parties and it became a permanent member of the Security Council. I'm talking China. China now is coming in full strength. It's not, I don't want to say that the Chinese bear or the Chinese whatever, but it's a very strong, powerful. It is very well established.
The Russian bear.
It's resolved. It has a lot of resolve, and it has a lot of, let us say, some kind of humbleness of requirements from the international community. It never tells you, you have to do this so I can help you and give you some assistance. It doesn't tell you, well, you are missing on democracy, and you are missing on human rights, and you are missing of the rule of law. If you don't do this, I will not be able to help you. I'm sorry. This is the kind of game that the Western, let us say, systems are doing. I mean, this is the trade-off. Now, China is not saying that. China is saying, well, remember that we had the group of 77 developing countries and China. We did not even add it. We did not choose to add it even as a developing country, said, and China. So now, and China, are we going to move it to the developed countries? I don't think they will accept that. And I don't think that China, in its wisdom, usual wisdom, has asked for that or is about to ask for it. I think China knows how to address the issue of helping the developing countries, particularly in Africa. We have seen China-Africa, number one, Summit 1. Summit 2 is coming next year, and Egypt has very courteously offered to host it. And we are discussing this with the Chinese, that the second summit, China-Africa, comes to Egypt. So we are talking from a very different standpoint now. And I think that it's about time, but that the United States and the Western world, industrialized world, start looking at Africa from a different vantage point, where I'm going seriously and honestly going to help you. This is the second day of that US-Africa summit, and we are still talking human rights, rule of law, and so on. I mean, the usual, the old song. And I think that we have to manage to get another tune being played.
Let me here be fair and say that they have other sessions where the leaders are speaking about a prosperous Africa is based on inclusive growth and sustainable development and multilateral partnerships with Africa to address global challenges and enhancing food security and resilience of food systems. And plus, of course, what we have seen of the Biden's promises, the US president promises.
Let me tell you a little something. Hungry people don't care much about these grand, principles. I think we have to feed Africa. We have to provide good working opportunities for Africans. We have to sustain African economies. We have to be able to see Africans have enough food, enough hospitals, enough education possibilities, fight climate or adapt to climate problems which are going to hurt Africa very strongly. There is a lot to be done for Africa so that it reaches just the areas that you have been nicely describing here.
So, the president here is really putting a vision of Egypt, which is very much.
Which goes very much with the Egyptians, when we were talking Haya Karima, decent life.
We're speaking decent life, and they are speaking, or Africa is speaking about just the right of life.
So when Egypt is taking this as its leading principle, do you think that we will not be able to talk about the right to live or the decency of thinking how to avail the same to Africa. I think this is the usual, way and strategy, Egyptian strategy that has been all along. It has been evolved, it has been changing, but I think now we are presenting it in a more maybe forceful way, in a more sustainable way, in a more supported way. And we are moving very well with Africa slowly towards achieving this target. I hope that by the third day tomorrow, that decent decisions and viable decisions can be taken. This is very important. To me, this is a very important opportunity, and it should not be left without really coming out with bright decisions and resolutions in favor of Africa.
So, from your point of view, Your Excellency, here I have just 3 minutes left for me here. What would be an acceptable or proper promises, or let me say, because we don't need any more promises, but deeds, real deeds, that would be acceptable for Africa, particularly at this very critical stage the whole world is passing by?
Sign the check. The United States promised 15 billion to immediate 15 billion to Africa, to support Africa industry and the infrastructure. So let's sign the check. Let's disperse the money so that African problems, African businesses, African countries.
So there can be some resilience.
So there can be some kind of resilience and projects, actual projects on the ground. The ideas are there. I mean, we cannot say we are not going still to look for ideas. The ideas are there, they are known. Technology is known, supporting projects
transferring
are known. Investment opportunities.
Yes,
and
indeed.
I think Africa has been working very hard during the last few years about establishing a very well supported, investment arena and investment personalities that can undertake that. And I think that Egypt has a lot of potential to support this kind of actions. And we are ready, and I think we have it in the back mind. As soon as the check is signed, I think we are ready to go and help and achieve our dream and their dreams also.
It's a win-win situation, for God's sake. I don't know how they cannot grasp this, the idea itself. Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, my time is out, but yes, indeed. You said it all, Your Excellency Ambassador Jilan Allam, former Assistant Foreign Minister. That's exactly what we need, and we thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Absolutely. We're Egyptians, we are doers, we will do it.
I guess that takes us to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching, and good night.